Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Power and Promise of Headless. My name is Max Mabe. I am the Managing Marketing Director at Cloud New for DAM, and I'm joined by Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Hey, Max. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Happy to.
I am actually an evangelist in the product management team, or product marketing team, I should say, at Contentful. And as you know, content is kind of my bag. So I'm pretty happy to be here talking with you about content, about DAM, and about Headless and how Headless brings it all together.
That's great. Well, I don't know if you know, but I really like DAM. I'm really into digital asset management. I don't know if it was obvious.
I do know this about you.
Perfect. Well, hey, let's move to our next slide, please. So what are we going to talk about in this session? So there are kind of three things that we want to touch on. I'm going to look over here for a moment because I'm having trouble actually seeing the presentation. Let's see if I can change my view here. I can't.
The beauty of live.
Here we go.
Guess what, folks? We're live.
Now I can see it. So there are three things we're going to cover in this session. The first thing is, what exactly is Headless? I think I used to struggle with it. It seems very technical. You hear lots of different explanations as to what Headless is, what it isn't. So we're going to really give it to you straight. What exactly is Headless in a way that we can all understand? Secondly, which is the reason that I probably come to any webinar of any kind, is kind of the what's in it for me piece, right? So is Headless right for your organization? Every workflow, every company is unique. Does Headless benefit the way you want to work or the way you would like to actually work in the future? We're going to spend some time on that. And number three, why are DAM and CMS kind of the perfect power couple or perfect pairing? And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So now let's segue, Nicole. I'll let you cover the next slide on what is Headless.
Sounds good. So as you said, Max, it's kind of a technical term, but it has bigger implications that are absolutely not technical. So let's get into those. First, on the technical side, if you're interested in how it works, really what we're talking about here is separating the content itself from the code that's used to create the front end. So where the content is displayed, the endpoint, the device, the front end. There are lots of different terms for these things. Channel might be another one that you've heard of or used yourself. But really what happens is an API, an application programming interface, is used to pull the relevant content into wherever it's going to be displayed. So we're separating these two things. Let's think about what that actually means in practice, though. So if we go back a little bit in history to days that, unfortunately, you and I are both old enough to remember very well, when this whole website thing was relatively new, content management systems were essentially directly tied to the website. So what you saw on the website really determined where you would place content, how you would create it, how you would render it. And those two things were pretty inextricably linked. That was kind of fine for a while until several things happened. One is we had this proliferation of sites. We had a lot of different kinds of websites doing different things. We also had suddenly a lot of different kinds of endpoints. So things like social media came into the mix. We didn't just have a website, but we had a commerce site, for example. And then in more recent times, we've got even more layers that are building up on top of this. Some of them are systems. Some of them are mobile phone apps. We might have loyalty systems. We're even getting into exploring things like augmented reality and virtual reality. So all this stuff is drawing on the kinds of content that we want to have, that we'd really like to be consistent across all of those different things so that we can create really good customer experiences. But what we've seen is typically each different endpoint, each different system has a different way of managing content. With Headless, and because we're using APIs, because we've separated that rendering code from the content itself, what that allows us to do is, using a headless system, manage the content in a way that is not directly tied to wherever it's being displayed. So as you can see from my beautiful peacock slide here, you've got theoretically one place where you can at least see all of your content, manage it, and in some cases even create it. And yet you can make sure that that same content is being leveraged across any endpoint, any device, any interface or channel where you want to use it. So that's really what we mean by headless. It's separating these things. And it's got a whole bunch of advantages, and not least is changing the way that you can work. And we'll talk a lot more about that, because it means that you can really reduce duplicate effort, and you can also separate what different teams are doing. So the digital or the development team can be busy figuring out how to make a site or an app or some other kind of digital product look really cool, say a digital billboard, for example. And other parts of the organization, other content teams, can be busy working on whatever they're doing, whether it's legal terms and conditions or even what the latest and greatest promotions are. They can be working on the substance of those things without being dependent on the development team to actually put whatever they're creating into how it gets presented. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I think one of the big takeaways, and I think one of the advantages is what you talked about there at the end, which is that flexibility, right? Everyone's using that same piece of content or text string, that same image or that same video for everything that they're doing. There's intelligence built into the solution where it's the text is summarized to fit the screen or shortened, or it takes up one line versus two. The image is optimized as well. And you're working in parallel as well. You're not kind of waiting on one team to stop and hand off to you. You can use that same repository of content for all of your channels. And I think when we spoke recently, you kind of used this idea, before we move to the next slide, this idea of body and face.
Yes.
Maybe you can explain that, because when I heard that, I'm like, wow, this is really makes sense to me. Now I understand headless. Can you kind of walk us through that kind of example?
I can. Well, if you think about it, these endpoints, as I've described them, all the things that are the different channels that you might use to interact with a company, the app, the website, a knowledge base that might even be used internally or for self-service support, for example. All of these are the different channels. And these are, in essence, the face that a company has in the way that it communicates with you as the customer. And that's really what we mean. So if you think of it, the head is really all of these different endpoints or devices, the faces through which you actually communicate with a business. The content is the substance. It's the body. It's the type of interaction. It's what you're talking about. It's the product information, for example, about what you're going to buy, the policies on whether you can return it or not. It really is separating that kind of content or substance, the body of the conversation, from the way in which it's presented, the face or the channel.
Perfect. Great. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this one's past and present. We've got a little bit of a build out. We'll start with the past, and then you'll talk a little bit about the present.
Yeah, let's go forward in time. So we'll start by going back. So one of the things that I think really is germane to this conversation is, how did we get to where we are, and why are we talking so much about headless right now? And I think a lot of it has to do with, as I said, the history of how these different content management systems and other systems have really come about, the tools we've used to manage what it is we're using to communicate with our customers. And in the past, what we found is all kinds of business applications, including content and asset management systems, were really very monolithic. And that had a lot to do with the way the technology was built, the underlying architecture. And the fact of the matter is, things were monolithic because they kind of had to be in order to work effectively. In order to get the scope of functionality that was actually going to do something useful, you kind of needed a great big enterprise suite of some kind, right? The downside of that is that it's really tough to customize those. If you're trying to work in a way that wasn't baked into the system, you're going to have a tough time. You can do it, but it's going to take a lot of money and it's going to take a lot of effort, and it's not going to be very flexible if you ever decide to change it. The other thing with the classical way of doing this, if you will, is that a lot of this stuff was centrally purchased. And that kind of made sense because it was big and it was expensive. And if you couldn't centralize and justify a larger business case for making the investment, you probably weren't going to be able to spend the money anyway. But if we fast forward then to where we are today, we're operating in a very, very different environment. And I think one of the key things that we've all learned, especially over the last year and a half or so, is that there's a real need for speed and flexibility and adaptability today. When you're dealing in a digital environment, you can't wait for that kind of top-down directive on what to do. You have to have some degree of flexibility as a team in order to determine what the right thing to do is and make sure that it happens quickly, because there's no time to wait for explicit instructions on everything. You've got to have a sense of your mission, the collective mission as a business, your role within that as a team, and also have the tools to be able to make it happen. So this adaptability becomes a really big issue as well. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so does this idea of autonomy, because if we're not in this kind of top-down command and control type of work culture anymore, that means we all have to be very collaborative. And that requires us to be able to define and do our own work, but to understand how that fits with what the work of other teams is as well, and how it all fits together. So part of what we're seeing in this move to things like headless technologies is the fact that they can work very autonomously. They can support the needs of different teams that might actually be quite different, and yet still fit within this broader scope of, say, a corporate objective for how we're going to work as a business.
Perfect. Let's move to the next slide, please. Ooh, this slide I really like, yes.
Yeah, well, this is my attempt to give us a little bit of a picture of how that actually looks. And I talked before about the kind of dev or the digital teams versus the marketing and other content teams that are actually out creating those experiences, often for customers, sometimes even for other employees internally as well. But what we really see with this kind of approach of headless is that we're allowing each of these teams to work independently, to work autonomously on the key things that they're really focused on. So the platform team is busy figuring out how to define the different elements of the content, which types of assets, how they get managed, how they get stored, how they get presented, particularly how they get presented into each of those different interfaces or channels or endpoints, the faces, again, that we were talking about earlier, and really trying to make that as effective and engaging as possible. But they're doing that in concert with the other teams that are really way more focused on the different types of experiences that they're creating. And I know, Max, as a marketing guy, you've got quite a bit of experience in this stuff as well.
I know a little bit about experiences for sure. I mean, I think it's really interesting, you're working hand in hand, and I like this big circle in the middle, right? Because the platform team is basically, they're not just making these new features or deciding which way we're going to go. They're kind of collaborating with the experience side of the house to make sure that they have what they need in order to move the brand forward and the experiences forward. Whether you were an assortment team and you're concerned about related products, if you're a retailer, if you were just a marketer who's creating web pages for solutions that you want to sell, and you're worried about imagery and video looking its best and shining. You want to make sure that you have the tools and the platform and the support and the agility to launch those experiences across all channels and all audiences. And I really think this is a great diagram of showing the synergy between two different ways of working, but again, still using that headless approach where you have that autonomy and that feeling that you can move forward and not have to really wait on others on the team to give you that okay to move the brand forward.
Yeah, it's true. And the other thing about this that I think is really powerful is that it allows different kinds of experience teams to still work in a way that is very coordinated and that results in experiences that feel very consistent for customers, particularly, but they don't necessarily have to do that in a way that has some big onerous kind of coordination that goes along with it, because everybody's clear on, what are the big hero images? What are the key messages? What are the elements that help me communicate that? So I can pick and choose which ones are appropriate for what my objectives are for my audience. And I don't have to worry that what you're doing, Max, is going to be totally off kilter and out of whack with that, right?
And I think it comes back to what we call the peacock or the fan slide, right? Since we're all working from that same store of experience widgets, of content, of images and videos, we know we're using the right pieces. And because of the intelligence of the Contentful CMS piece, whether it's displayed on a large in-store screen, an iPad, desktop, or mobile, we know it's going to look the way that we designed, and it's going to be consistent, which is something that a lot of people struggle with in a non-headless workflow.
Yes, absolutely. Which I guess brings us really to the next slide, which is talking a little bit more about Contentful and Contentful's approach to this whole headless thing and what we're really trying to do, and how it fits together, Max, with what you guys are doing at Cloudinary as well. So let me start a little bit with the Contentful picture here. I talked about headless. I talked about APIs. Really, these are means to an end. And the end is making it as easy and as flexible as possible to manage all of the different sources of content and types of content that you have, including digital assets, for example, and be able to present that anywhere you want it to go in the appropriate form. Now, what's interesting about this is we're taking sort of a platform approach. And I know that's something Cloudinary is doing as well. For us, that means leveraging the fact that we're using cloud infrastructure. We're a cloud native SaaS provider. We have our APIs and our content spaces, which is what allows us to manage this content effectively. We've also built an app framework, and we're building, and a lot of our partners and even customers are building apps on top of what we've already created using these APIs so that they can do a number of things, right? Integrate with the other kinds of cloud tools that they're already using, for example, automate the operations. You talked about things like workflows and the kinds of processes that go into actually managing content and digital assets really effectively, creating those experiences, and also ensuring that we're doing this in a way that's both reliable in the way it's delivered to customers and it's secure as well, because especially anything that's touching that customer experience, security is a very big deal these days. So what we're trying to do at Contentful, leveraging APIs, leveraging this headless approach, is actually do two things at once. One is certainly address how we present content effectively through all the heads, through all the faces, the endpoints, but also how we create that work environment that's actually tailored to different kinds of people using the system, using and supporting content. So whether it's the dev teams that have their own kinds of workflows and want to be able, for example, to work in the tools and languages that they prefer, or different types of content teams that have different requirements, different preferred ways of working. We're really trying to integrate into all of those different workspaces and provide some standalone workspaces as well that make it as easy as possible to manage the work of content.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, I think this is a really cool slide. It's Contentful plus digital asset management and Cloudinary, which is really great. So this is going to build out. So let's talk about a workflow that we probably would all understand. At least some portions of it probably match what we do internally. So we could go one build forward, please. So let's talk about the internal flow. Typically, you source an image or you have an idea, you manage some files, you collaborate a bit internally, you might share with some external people, you might generate something to create that experience. Let's move forward one more. So, Nicole, you want to talk about the bullet points on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. What I think is so critical about these internal workflows is, again, a lot of what we've talked about already. Everybody knows their role. They're able to work on their own stuff independently, but because everybody's clear on how this all fits together, they're doing that in concert without it having to be a difficult or onerous thing to do. And because we at Cloudinary and at Contentful have taken this headless approach, you've got the option to create the work environment that's the best place to do that. And there might be multiple different work environments depending on the different teams and what their priorities and preferences are. But regardless of that, because you're creating these tailored environments, because we've got workflows that are defined that cut across different teams and different elements of that workflow or of the operation, let's say, what we're able to do is reduce that duplication of effort along the way. It makes it a lot more efficient.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. I mean, with our platform, we've got non-UI ways of working. Developers, they want to code and code interfaces. You may have non-technical business users that want or need a UI. You've got your creative users that are probably living some of their life in creative applications. There's an integration into that world as well. So it's really nicely connected. Let's move forward one more, please. And we'll talk about the external portion of this. And then one more move forward. Sorry. Let's talk a little bit about Transform, which I think is a really great, powerful ability of our digital asset management solution, kind of underpinned by the Cloudinary platform. You can transform videos and assets to create all those asset variations and store those within the DAM and share them. Or you can also take a different approach of just kind of storing that one master video or asset and then have those transformations happen in the cloud for you. And then if we build one more, that will ultimately feed all of your external needs, right? You can do your personalization and making sure it's not right for the audience, but also right for the different devices and screen sizes. You can assure that video and imagery is optimized with our delivery path. And then, of course, you can measure all of that stuff to make sure that, hey, what's popular, what's not, what do people enjoy? And we've got one more build here just to show some of the advantages externally. So as we've touched on here already, you're going to have a lot better performance and faster time to market because this holistic end-to-end piece is so tightly wound together and lets people work in the ways and with tools that they would like. Of course, easy experimentation, and we talked a little bit about this when we were prepping this session, which is that failing fast piece, or that ability to experiment and not have to kind of put a lot of effort into creating that piece.
Yeah, well, you certainly don't want these experiments to require a long setup time. Sometimes it's a question of testing ideas really quickly before you miss the market opportunity. And in other cases, it's simply being able to experiment in a lot of different ways in the same amount of time because you can try them out quickly and then move on to the next experiment. So all of this stuff way easier in this kind of headless approach.
And the great part is with headless, you're not creating you're optimizing the video just for this task. You're not optimizing an image just for this. You have a viewer, you have widgets already from the CMS and our side as well. So you can very easily create the experience that you want, very little effort. And if it doesn't work, well, you can tweak a little bit and try again. So really, really important, I think, for agility and flexibility and moving the brand forward. And obviously all of this totals up to really consistently good customer experiences, and consistent is important, right? We've talked about that on a number of slides. Consistent on all devices, all screens, all touch points with your brand.
I'd even say, Max, that just getting the customer experiences to be consistent is a massive step toward making them good, because part of the problem for customers is when you expect one thing and what you get is something completely different. So
exactly. Let's go forward one more. Okay, so let's wrap up here, then we'll do some Q&A. So what did we learn? So we learned that headless is the architecture for modern teams and modern brands. Is it right for your organization? Well, if your business wants to embrace digital, which I can't imagine you wouldn't want to, headless is probably right for you. DAM and CMS, I think it's really obvious that the synergy between digital asset management and content management systems is really ideal for almost any organization. So I think we covered most of these. Let's go forward one more. So here's some related sessions that you might want to check out. We've got a great session with Department Therapy where they talk about streamlining their asset workflow with creatives and developers. We've got a Future of Digital Media session, which is great because we explain and talk about the upcoming trends and the impact of those on potentially your workflows and customers. I did a session earlier today for Reimagined Digital Asset Management, which you can watch the stream of as well, which you might enjoy if you want to learn more about Cloudinary's solution. Okay, let's jump forward one more. Thank you. And I think, Nicole, that we're ready for Q&A. Are you ready?
I think we are. And I'm going to start us off, Max, because I've got one for you.
Oh, okay. Well, let's check them first. Check your screen as well. Let's see what we have. And when you find one,
alrighty,
let me know and I'll be happy to answer.
Sounds good. Well, I've got one that is burning in my mind because, we've talked about the power couple here between CMS and DAM, the peanut butter and chocolate combination that's so good. But I really am curious if you could talk a little bit more about how Cloudinary helps with that rich media experience across the different channels that we've got, because there are, let's face it, more and more of these channels. We also know that rich media is one of the most engaging forms of content as well. So we're talking about digital assets here that are really crucial to getting those great customer experiences.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think I could give a very long answer. Let me try to choose some of the things that I think are most impactful when we're thinking about this. You're right. The demand for digital content has exploded over the last few years. And I think given what we've been through in the last almost 2 years, there's a higher demand because people are using digital devices a lot more than ever. So they expect refresh, changed content, great experiences. Within our DAM, we have this idea of transformation. So you have one video or one image, and you can set up your transformations, which are basically the sizing and the attributes that every image or video might need to power all of your channels, right? You set that up and then it's automated. So you're publishing from that one source file. All of that time that was spent in the past on manually creating those variations as one-offs, storing them in the DAM, and then worrying about whether you have the right version and married to the right experiences is gone. So that's one thing that's like a huge time saver. It's automated. All of those files live in the cloud. You're not managing thousands of files across experiences. The second thing that we have is a whole viewer library. For example, if you've ever gone to a product detail page, which I think most of us have, where you might see different swatches or alternate views, a lot of companies have to create that viewing experience themselves from scratch and maintain it going forward. That is something that's included in our viewer library out of the box. We also have an intelligent video player as well, which not only adapts the quality of the video stream based upon the bandwidth that device may have, but it also determines the screen size and resolution of that video as well to make sure that your video looks great on every screen. So there are a lot of features. Those are probably the two, I think, that most people would benefit from offhand.
It's interesting because I was talking just the other day with a customer who was addressing specifically this challenge, and particularly saying that one of the things they have to do, and they often have to do it very quickly, is be able to search through video and still imagery and figure out what the color background is, because they've got limitations on their titles. And if they can't get, a light colored title on a dark background quickly, they've missed the opportunity. So it is a real challenge, and it sounds
exactly. And I will say that we've solved that as well in our digital asset management solution, because you can search on primary or secondary colors as well to kind of help you fit that need of theme or an overlay, or what we call the lower third as well of an image too. Let's check the questions here. There is, let's see. Okay, here's a good one, I think. Let me approve it, and then we'll talk about it. What level of effort is required to move to a headless architecture? I think this is perfect for you, Nicole.
Well, it's a great question. And I think the answer is as much as you want, because the reality is you can move into a headless architecture relatively easily and straightforwardly. You can essentially replicate what you're already doing in a headless construct. And that isn't too difficult. I think the downside of doing that is that it's almost a missed opportunity, because I think as part of that transition, what certainly all of our customers find is they very quickly begin to see that they can work in a different way and they can do things differently because of this approach. And so that almost always initiates a cycle of wanting to revise the way that they think about what they're doing, changing their content model, for example, in a way that's going to be a lot more efficient. So to your analogy of putting an image in, a video in once, and being able to transcode that for all of the appropriate devices and ways in which it's going to be displayed, we're really looking at doing exactly the same kind of thing with content, but it forces you as a business to think very differently and to coordinate across both the design and the dev team and all of the content teams to really think about what the most efficient way is to design those content types and to design that content model effectively.
It brings something to mind that I've said for many years with digital asset management. Can you stand it up on day one, and can you throw all of your files into it, and can you start to use it? Sure. Are you going to get the value out of the solution? Probably not. So a little bit of workflow investigation and discovery, understanding what Cloudinary offers, what Contentful offers, and how that can move your business forward and give you opportunities. It takes a little bit of work initially, but if you do that homework and investigation, you can really move it forward in the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So Nicole, thank you. I think we're just about out of time here. There were some questions we didn't get to answer. If we do have your name, we'll certainly try to reach out to you and connect with you with those answers. Certainly go to Cloudinary site for digital asset management, and you can find out probably some of the answers to your questions. Visit the Contentful site as well for some additional information. And we appreciate you guys attending our session. Enjoy ImageCon. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Max.